Hello everybody, so you may have noticed that yesterday one thing led to another and I made an hour-long video. My analysis for episode 1, I never intended to be that long, but like I said in that video, so many things happen that I feel I can't discuss this series without bringing up. The amount of rock and roll history we're seeing being made is happening at a breakneck pace. As they filmed like over 100 hours of footage over the course of one of the most productive months in Beatle history. Although, I mean, it's funny to say that because there are many long stretches within this film where the Beatles feel like they're not getting enough done. But I'm going to get right into this now. This is my analysis for episode 2, which has just been released today. So apparently the meeting that they'd had with George didn't go so well. That's what they said at the end of the first episode. We start the second episode on Monday, January 13th. Everyone's very tense. Nobody's sure if any of the Beatles will show up at all. And at first, it looks like only Ringo is coming. Only Ringo is there to start the day. Apparently, their meeting with George started really well, but it fell apart. That's what he's saying, at least. But then, shortly thereafter, Paul and Linda do show up. So, clearly, there'll be some semblance of Beatles there that day, but they can't get a hold of John, and they're getting worried. And here's something that I thought was really interesting. At this point, Linda says that she feels like Yoko's been talking for John. Like, John hasn't been even saying his own opinions. We've just been hearing from what Yoko said. I thought that was interesting because we haven't heard Yoko say anything in this documentary series as of yet. There's really none of her talking. They've not included any of it. Now, maybe Linda's talking about things John and Yoko were saying during the meeting on Saturday that we don't get to see. But I thought that was interesting. I was like, well, if Yoko's playing a big part in this, why aren't we seeing her? I don't know. Paul mentions at this point that he feels that the band is musically better than they've ever sounded, but they just haven't been able to get along together since they stopped touring in 1966. So that's the second theory we've heard. Of course, George had mentioned in episode 1 that he felt that ever since Brian Epstein passed away, the group had never been the same. Paul says ever since touring stopped, they've never been the same because touring forces you to be together all the time, forces you to learn to get along, sort of, and they don't have those sort of commitments anymore. So interesting. They're all sort of weighing in on their theories for why they don't think things are going great. And Paul mentions that he says if push came to shove, John would pick Yoko over the Beatles. He doesn't sound particularly angry about it, but he says it sort of matter-of-factly, which, I mean, I think is true. I mean, he's deeply in love with her at this point, of course. Paul says, if people watch this 50 years from now, they think this is funny. All this bickering, which I mean, they, as a documentary crew, they have to keep that in, because of course here we are 52 years ago, so it becomes poignant. I wouldn't call it funny, from a viewer, more than 50 years later, but, yeah, funny would not be the right word for it. It's fascinating, for sure. But yeah, they're kind of just killing time, kind of chatting, because they really, don't know what to do. I mean, without, they know George isn't going to show up, and they don't know about Paul. Paul says he wants to stay for the week, though. He says he really wants to make the most of that week and at least try to get something going without them, and then if he doesn't hear from them after the end of the week, then it'll be done. But then at this point, he mentions an idea. He's like, okay, if we're going to do a TV special, why don't we do one that announces the breakup of the Beatles? He's like, we're going to intersplice it with big news stories like earthquake, fire, this, and the end of the show is going to be one of those newsreels saying the Beatles have broken up. So clearly he is not optimistic for the group's future at this point. And at this point, while Paul is clearly frustrated and feeling like the Beatles are going to break up, he just says, well, and then there were two. And then there's this incredible, long, lingering silence where Ringo and Paul get visibly emotional. It's actually hard to watch. You're seeing Ringo and Paul right on screen, contemplating the potential end of the Beatles. It's a very heavy moment. And then Linda sort of makes an impassioned plea to them to, like, you guys gotta be together, people want you. And there's so many people in their immediate vicinity saying these things to them whenever it looks like they're gonna break up. There's always someone trying to reassure them that, oh, the public needs you, though, the public needs you. And I wonder if that's as overwhelming as it is reassuring for them. That's a lot of weight on your shoulders, I suppose. I mean, as an entertainer. At this point, they start talking about locations again. just trying to fill time coming up with anything. But then, just when it looks like he wasn't going to show, John does arrive at lunchtime. And here's a section of the episode that I thought was a little, I don't know. So John wanted to meet with Paul without cameras, but the film crew hid like an audio recording device in a flower pot so that they could tape the conversation, so we have the audio of it. I mean, it's very cool to hear back, but I mean, that seems like a pretty blatant invasion of privacy. I don't know. But John says he's been talking to George, and George says he's willing to carry on with the project, but he just wants to do it from home. He basically just wants to send his recordings in from his mobile home studio. And Paul says, well, I guess that's what it's come to. Hey, we'll never see him. If he's going to be a part of the band, he's just going to do it that way. And then John does express his feelings about Paul's sort of management style. Paul mentioned in the first episode that he feels like he's become the boss since Epstein passed away, but he's kind of thrust that position upon himself. But yeah, John is kind of siding with George a little bit here about how Paul has not necessarily been fair for sort of hearing out other people's ideas and suggestions, and how Paul's kind of totalitarian and how he wants to put these songs together. And then it's not, I mean, I think it's productive. I think that Paul kind of understands what he's saying, although he's certainly frustrated about it. But Paul makes a comment there that, again, if you're a documentary crew, you have to keep in. He says, you know, probably when we're all old, we'll get along and be able to sing and play together. And I'm upset because the universe has robbed us of that eventuality. Yeah, so that's kind of a sad moment because, you know, he was probably right. If they all had lived a little longer, you probably would have seen. I have this theory that if John was still around, they would have got back together in some capacity around when they were trying to do the anthology project in the 90s. Anyway, apparently George has gone back to Liverpool, but now he says he will be back Wednesday. I guess he's calmed down a little. He says he'll be back Wednesday. Not necessarily to be in the recording studio, but to be in London so that the Beatles can at the very least meet him. And then they start working on Get Back without George. Although he kind of introduces it as, okay, we'll do the song Sweet Loretta Marsh. So I'm not sure if that's kind of an inside joke or if that was indeed the title at the time. Then they change it to, like, Sweet Loretta Mary, and they just can't come up with that name to start that lyric. Like I said, throughout the course of this documentary series so far, we've been watching the song Get Back come to be. We see it from its moment of inception right through to its completion. One of the true gems of being able to watch this. It's at this point that Paul comes up with the had his home in Arizona lyric. And he tries to come up with a town name in Arizona. He's like, Tucson's in Arizona, right? So then that verse becomes that line rather becomes intact. Had a home in Tucson, Arizona. And Ringo's even pitching lyrics at this point. Nothing I saw that they used, but Ringo's pitching in some lyrics too. And by the end of that, you see them going into the chorus, and the Get Back chorus is now intact. So maybe the song is called Get Back at this point, because yeah, the chorus sounds pretty similar to how it went on the album. By this point, yeah, it's getting to be the end of the day, January 13th. It's becoming clear that concerts for January 19th and 20th are just not going to be happening. So they push them back a week. They say, we're going to do some concerts on January 26th and 27th. They still really want to do those, but they've had too many setbacks. And Paul starts going on about the set list that they're going to play. So they clearly still want to have those concerts. But that's the end of what they do that first day that week. On Tuesday, back in the studio, it's January 14th. And Michael wants to film a little bit of Paul playing the piano and talking about playing the piano. So he's doing that and plays like little snippets of songs here and there. And Paul jokes, since he was the first one to arrive, that he makes a joke. He says, and then there was one. But I don't think anyone was really that late. Ringo arrives right after that. And then Paul plays what I believe seems like an improvised little tune called I Bought a Piano the Other Day. It's very cute. Then, yeah, that little jam goes on with Paul and Ringo doing a really funny, cute little boogie-woogie bit. Paul shows him a song called Sitting in the Backseat of My Car that he had written the night before. I feel like I've heard that song somewhere. I feel like Paul did eventually flesh that out into a full song. Let me know in the comments if I'm right about that. I'm not sure. Yeah, they keep doing that, and as they're just fooling around on the piano, the Magic Christian sets start arriving. Of course, starting on the 24th, they're going to have to use Twickenham for the Magic Christian with Ringo. But at this point, John arrives, and they've brought in Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers comes in, and he seems to think that maybe they want to meet him about something, and they say, yeah, we're wanting to turn this TV series into a movie. We want to make a movie. But they're coming up with no actual suggestions for something they want to do. In fact, they're downright not making any sense at all. They're just kind of saying things, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it looks in this scene like Peter Sellers is like, what the hell did they invite me for? He looks kind of put off by it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. And then eventually he just kind of leaves as quickly as he came in, so that conversation didn't make any headway in any sort of productive way. Paul gets annoyed at this point that John was late, and John is acting weird here. To be brutally honest, I could be wrong. My first thought was, is John high? Did John come in high? Because he's not contributing to any conversations. At this point, he really starts only speaking in song lyrics. It's a little bit strange. But he is a hilarious guy, and eventually he starts running into little comedic bits and stuff, and he really genuinely starts to make Paul laugh. So like I said when I was doing my analysis of the first episode, John is really good at, we see him being very good at sort of diffusing potentially difficult situations through comedy. And at this point, you start realizing that, or at least I started realizing that, while John is not functioning very well in a sort of logistical discussions capacity, he's in a very artistic mood, and he immediately starts running through some songs, including Mean Mr. Mustard, which was not used for this project, but would go on Abbey Road. And then there's a song called Madman done there as well. But the band is obviously still in trouble. They don't have George. You know, George is not in the band at this point. You think of George's tenure in the Beatles as being one, like, solid chunk there, but it's funny, there were little days there where, like, for 2 days in 1969, George was not a member of the Beatles. Actually, more than that, for a weekend and 2 days. At this point, Paul says that as a matter of principle, we should stop filming, and they do. So that's the end of the film we see from Tuesday, and they elect to cancel their next day's rehearsals as well, but in its place, they're going to meet with George on Wednesday the 15th. At his home again, and this time it says that the meeting goes pretty well. At this point, they do cancel the TV program outright, but they will eventually decide to turn that into a movie instead. And they also decide to stop using Twickenham. They decide to go back somewhere they're more comfortable. They want to go back to Abbey Road Studios. I actually really didn't know that the first part of Abbey Road, or the first part of Let It Be, rather, what would become Let It Be, the Get Back project, was recorded at Twickenham, and then parts of it were done at Abbey Road. That's interesting. But Abbey Road is booked up. It's like one of the most high in-demand studios. I believe it's like EMI's flagship studio at this point. But what they do is they build the Beatles sort of a makeshift studio in the basement. They start building that. January 16th, day 10, sort of. It's the last day at Twickenham, but it's not really. Literally, the only thing we see is a kind of sad shot of Mal and the team dismantling the Beatles' gear and taking it out, while Paul is playing Oh Darling on a piano. I think that's the first time we've heard Oh Darling in this series. It's a cool moment. It doesn't sound anything really like what Oh Darling would turn into. I mean, the lyrics and melody and all that are the same, but the way it's being played is not necessarily. Then on either late that day or on January 17th, the next day, I forget, George does show up to check out the studio, the basement studio that's being built at Abbey Road. But Glenn and George hate it, and for good reason. It's not just that it's not up to their standards. They just can't get good sound out of it. There's just too much feedback. There's too much like interference. They just can't get a good sound, so it's going to have to be totally rebuilt apparently, and they can't get any more work done the rest of that week. But a new system arrives over the weekend. They sort of stitch 2 4-track systems together. It's really cool, and then they run them through George's 8-track system that was talked about earlier. But finally, on January 20th, which I think is interesting, was supposed to be the date of their second concert, but of course that's been pushed back. On January 20th, the Monday, they decide to have their first session at the new sort of Apple studio location, but I'm not sure they actually did any recording that day, because the film we see from the next day, Tuesday, shows that the studio's not really finished, so I'm sure that was just a rehearsal day, and the first day that the four-piece Beatles are intact in the better part of a week. And at this point, they interview some Apple scruffs who are outside the studio. Apple scruffs, of course, are the Beatles' rabid fans around this time that always seem to know where they're going. Apparently there were Apple scruffs outside of Twickenham when they were there, and now there's Apple scruffs outside the windows of Abbey Road. It's funny, they always seem to be one step ahead of the Beatles, knowing where they are. And I thought one interesting thing from that exchange was they're asked at one point what they most want from the Beatles, and they say, a live show. We haven't seen a live show in so long. They want a live show. Beatles still holding on hope to doing one here. But yeah, no cameras that first day, which is probably a good choice. Probably a good choice to let the four of them get back together without the cameras being in there. But they do arrive on Tuesday, January 21st, and we finally get film from inside this Abbey Road studio. You see film of George arriving. Even though they've changed where they're going to do the recording, their plan is to still record live takes. They want to do takes all the way through. They want songs that are performable live, and they want basically live performances to make up the album. And then at this point, they decide to turn the film into the series. So that's why there was no film crew on Monday, because in their meeting with George, they had canceled the TV series outright. And now by Tuesday, they've decided to have the crew come back, and it's now just going to be a film. They have a new time constraint, though, because Glyn Johns only has a few days left, and George Martin really wants consistency, so he really wants Glyn to be there and see through the whole recordings, but that means they only have 3 or 4 days to get stuff down. At this point, they talk about how news of the Beatles' imminent breakup is all over the news at that point, and there's even claims that they had a fist fight, which never happened. At this point, the director, Michael, comes in and starts asking John about Rock and Roll Circus. Michael is also directing Rock and Roll Circus, which is that awesome, I almost said concert film. It's not a concert film. It's like a rock and roll movie event with the Rolling Stones, and I think Jethro Tull's in it, and of course John Lennon. It's very cool. And he's telling John he wants him to do the intro, the sort of, and now, ladies and gentlemen, here are the Rolling Stones, and John sort of makes fun of that intro throughout the rest of the series, the stuff we see. At this point, you see John and Ringo having fun. Paul actually arrives last. I noticed that this is, I think, the first time we've seen Paul be the fourth and final Beatle to arrive to a rehearsal. And then they do a jam that I've seen before. I think it may have been featured in the Let It Be movie. A jam about the tabloid headlines where Paul's just reading off tabloid headlines and the band is doing a jam behind him. It's really fun. But the recording system is still not ready, so they're just kind of still stuck in a holding pattern. At this point, this is just an observation I had when George had his records come in. He had a pile of records either given to him or that he brought into the studio, and he's really, really excited about the Miracles Make It Happen album. And he also has a copy of Beggar's Banquet in that pile, which I thought was cool. At this point, they have a song list. They have a definitive series of songs that they want to play for this concert/album. I mean, it's not the final song list by any means, but at least they have a direction now, and then they start working on Dig a Pony. But immediately once they get into recording, they notice they have sound problems, and Glyn says, yeah, there's still a lot we gotta do, and now it still won't be ready till the afternoon. So again, I said at the beginning of this that the Beatles were under a lot of time constraints here, and I also mentioned that this is one of the most productive months in Beatle history, but it shows just how many slowdowns there were during this. The band did not feel like they were having a productive month, I don't think, but again, the month has become so legendary over time. But yeah, whenever there's these sound problems, though, and the band doesn't really have a direction they're working towards, you get these really fun jams. You get these really fun clips of the Beatles just jamming fun things, sometimes old songs from the 50s, sometimes their own older tunes. It's all really fun. But then in the afternoon, the system is finally ready, and they start working on the song All I Want Is You. I thought was interesting. They're calling it All I Want Is You, but Dig a Pony is the final title. And I think a couple of lyrics are still different at this point, but it's mostly the final arrangement that we're going to hear. Oh, I mentioned in the first video when they started rehearsing on the Twickenham stage, I was like, oh, it's the famous set from the Let It Be music video. It's not. I was totally wrong. I guess it's just those are the instruments they were using, and my brain got confused. That video you see, which was used on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1970 and has become sort of the de facto Let It Be music video, was filmed at this set at the Abbey Road Basement Studios. At this point, you hear John's famous, like, I Dig Epiphany by whoever he says, and that's the little clip that eventually got used on the Let It Be album, and it's always cool to see the actual video of him saying those things we've heard a million times listening to that album. One thing I thought was really cool is they have the Dig a Pony riff really dialed in at this point. I'm talking about the they have that so down. You can still see that the band knows each other so well and have been together so long that they stuff like that they can play really tight after just a couple days of rehearsing. It's really fun. Then they go into the control room to sort of listen back to it, and they're discussing drum rhythms with Ringo. Again, all these little things like that. Just to be able to see every little aspect of these songs coming together is really special. Then we get a little snippet of a John song called Madman. Then the band starts recording I've Got a Feeling. They get a couple of takes of that down. They get a couple of takes of Don't Let Me Down in as well. And it seems like a very productive day, but these aren't really the last. I don't know if they used any of those takes on the final album, but seemed like a productive day. But again, they don't have one piece to the puzzle that they're going to get very soon. At this point, an organ arrives. This is the last piece of the puzzle I was telling you about. The band's like, yeah, that would be cool. I think these songs could use an organ, but if one of us is playing the organ, like they said, they wanted to do this live, so if one of them's playing the organ, then they only have one guitar, and they're like, that'll be too thin. And then they start wondering, oh, maybe we should get someone else to come in and play organ. And of course they will. So then they do kind of a goofy version of Don't Let Me Down with John on organ. I've noticed when the Beatles aren't, when the four of them are not totally sold on an idea, particularly John and Paul, that's when they start to get goofy. I find when they're not confident in something, and I'm getting too into like psychology now, but it's like, it seems like when they're not totally sold on something, they sort of encase themselves in this layer of irony and humor. It's funny. But yeah, then they do another kind of goofy version of She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. Oh no, She Came In Through the Bathroom Window was a little bit more of an actual sort of rehearsal with Paul teaching John his piano part, which is a bit of a different arrangement than what we hear on the Abbey Road album. But they're really having trouble filling out their sound, and the episode ends with Paul getting really frustrated with the rest of the group over the state of the harmonies at the time. Band just, which I think that clip is added in there right at the end to show that the band is still not getting along. They're still not getting as much done as they could if they were really seeing eye to eye. But they will solve a lot of those problems on day 13. Now we get to day 13, which is Wednesday, January 22nd. So cool to see all this. Sorry, I'm still kind of geeking out about it. More headlines are coming in now. They're about George Harrison's apparently he's up on assault charges according to these tabloids. It's all not true or anything. And we also see what I thought was a really cool clip of them bringing in the artwork concepts for Mary Hopkins' Postcard album, which Paul, I think, produced that album. And they're talking about how a different company's going to have to make the U.S. pressings. Paul's upset about that. Because he says, the American record labels always cheap out on the quality of the product, which I think is interesting as a record collector to see that. Anyway, the the current plan now, they have a new plan for where they're going to do concerts. They want to do them at Primrose Hill in London, but they still feel like they're about a week away from being ready for that, so they may push it back further. And then there's a little conversation that I thought was cool, where John praises Peter Green, talks about how much he likes Fleetwood Mac, and then they start jamming out a Canned Heat song, and then they go into recordings for Dig a Pony. And then after that, they do a bunch of takes of the song I've Got a Feeling until John gets totally sick of it. But now Paul has the middle part totally figured out, his screaming part where it's like, somebody who looks like you. Yeah, so that song's really coming together, but the session is not going so well still. It seems every day there's some sort of argument, some sort of hang-up, some sort of reason things aren't going perfect. There's another little conversation piece that is historically interesting, where John talks about Martin Luther King Jr. and says that if he were still around, he would have been president one day. I thought that was interesting. Again, it shows a clip of them showing Ringo some drum ideas, but it felt like that one wasn't going as well as the previous one. I've Got a Feeling wasn't quite coming together how they wanted it yet, but then Billy Preston arrives. Very special moment. Billy Preston is in town to play some TV appearances. The movie mentions that he had met the Beatles in Hamburg in 1962, and the Beatles, don't forget, had mentioned him much earlier in the first week from episode 1 as being someone they really respected. And Billy has no idea that they're going to ask him to effectively join the band. But they I think it was John is like, yeah, so we're doing an album. We want all these songs to have piano parts because we can't fill out the arrangement. Would you like to play all the piano on the album and maybe do a live show with us? And it's so amazing to see. Billy is just thrilled. He's just beaming. I mean, who wouldn't be? I mean, if the Beatles came up to you one day and were like, listen, we're looking for a piano player. Do you want to sub in? Yeah. I mean, yeah, I do. So yeah, he is thrilled. And the Beatles, they play a kind of funny version of the song A Taste of Honey for him, which is from Please Please Me, one of the early Beatles songs. Not a Beatles song, but one of the early Beatles covers they used to play. And that was because back in the Hamburg days, Billy used to always request they play that song. So it was kind of a fun little full circle moment. And then they go into I've Got a Feeling with him on keys, and immediately everything fits. Now, I say everything fits because, I mean, that's the version we're all used to with Billy on the organ there. But he seems to have his parts down immediately. He seems to immediately know what he's going to play. And after just one take, it seems like maybe they did more. But it's presented as after one take of that, John just says, all right, you're in the group. And he's so happy, and his happiness seems to be rubbing off on the rest of the band. And the band is having such a good time with Billy. This episode today really made me realize how important Billy Preston was to the Beatles. I knew he played piano during this era, but it's amazing to see how he really brings the group that was really on the verge of collapse back together. It's amazing. Then they go into Don't Let Me Down, and again, it seems like he immediately has the right piano part. He always has what would become his piano part. Then Glenn has to switch out some tapes, and that is yet another excuse for more jamming, so that's always fun. They jam stuff like Save the Last Dance for Me with Billy. That was cool. I like their version of Save the Last Dance for Me with Billy Preston in the room. Then they go into Dig a Pony, and again, it's sounding great. And then after that take of Dig a Pony, there's this really cool moment that I really like as a music historian, where Glenn says, all right, we're not going to use that one, so we go on to the next tape. We'll just erase those tapes. And Paul and John both go, no, don't erase the tapes. Are you erasing the tapes that you don't think are going to work? There's no reason to erase the tapes. We might want to reference them later. Thank you. Us Beatles fans, thank you for that. Now, the show is still planned for about a week out. They still feel they're about a week away from the show. But now they really feel like they're in a good place with Billy Preston joining them. Yep, and they're excited about the movie project and all of that. And there's a little thing thrown in about how Alan Klein wants to have a meeting with John. Alan Klein, the Rolling Stones manager, who he wants to meet him about the potential of managing the Beatles now. that never came to be, but that's very interesting that he wanted to do that. That's the end of what they do that day. We move forward to Thursday, which is January 23rd, and it starts with Paul is there. I think Paul, John, and Ringo are all there, as is Yoko, and Yoko is singing in this crazy avant-garde jam called Freak Out, and then George shows up shortly thereafter, and they're all like, "Oh, you missed it! You missed this fun jam." And that was interesting. I always think of, like, historically, Paul being sort of at odds with the whole John and Ringo thing, but Paul is certainly having fun with this Freak Out jam, and John is just thrilled that it was filmed. And he suggests we should put this on the album, kind of half joking. I felt like that moment was one of those, I'm joking, unless you want to, sort of things. At this point, they mentioned they've brought the anvil into the studio, the greatest instrument that the Beatles have ever used. That anvil played by, I believe, Mal. And then they do a version of Oh Darlin' with Billy Preston, which I thought was interesting. I don't believe Billy Preston winds up playing on that version of the song from Abbey Road. But that was fun to see. And then they decide they're going to work more on the song Get Back. Maybe they're going to add some solos, and they get into a discussion about the arrangement of that. Again, like I've said a few times, it's really cool to see that solo. It's really cool to see that song coming together because we've seen it from its inception in this series. At this point, George has this wild idea. First, I noticed that when John had to come up with a solo idea, he immediately had what eventually goes on the record, 4 little solo parts there. But George Harrison says, we need sort of a catchier hook. And he suggests, again, I think this is cool as a big Motown fan, he suggests they do it like I'll Be There. And they do a version of Get Back, with sort of a little I'll Be There. Get back. Like, he's like, we should have like a hook melody there. To me, I can see that Paul wants to include George at this point. He wants to give George's ideas. He feels, because again, George feels like he's not being given the time of day, and that's why he leaves the band. But Paul doesn't like that idea, so he again says no. But then George has an idea about a quieter verse, sort of like a breakdown verse, with just like John, I think, and Paul playing with only one guitar instead of 2, where it's a lot quieter. And Paul does like that one, so he finds a way to use one of George's submissions, sort of. But I'm noticing here, Billy has ideas too. You know, he's just a hired guy, but he has some ideas, and he adds a couple of, like, jazzier chords into it that are a big part of what will become the final mix to that song. So that's very cool. And so they spent a long time here just working out the final arrangement. And they're getting a bit confused. So they're trying so much to construct the arrangement of this song that after a while they're like, wait, there's 3 solos, there's a piano bit, there's a this, and they get confused and they sort of move on a little bit. And at this point they take a short break from playing to just have a fun conversation, and they're joking about tour stories, about the infamous shows late in their touring career where the audiences were just so loud that they couldn't hear each other play. I thought that was cool. At this point, Paul kind of jokingly plays I'll Get You, and that leads to John kind of jokingly doing a goofy version of Help, and then they do like a goofy version of Please, Please. It's always fun to see in any capacity them going back to their earlier songs just for any reason. It's just fun. Then there's this funny moment where Glyn Johns interrupts a Beatles take, and they all have fun yelling at him and making fun of him for that. But by this point, for all the confusion they had earlier, it does feel like Get Back is fully together in just about their final arrangement we'll hear on the album. And George comes up with the idea while in the control room that they should record it as a single. And they all kind of go, oh, maybe that is a good idea, because the movie mentions that they had not released a single in 5 months. So they're eager to get one out. So the band says, yeah, we could work on that. But then for the rest of the week, they don't really have Billy Preston. Which, I mean, as we'll see, maybe that'll cause a strain in the band, because the band is just finally getting going with Billy. But they don't have Billy Preston. Remember, it was said that Billy was in town to do some TV promotional appearances. Well, those are what he's got to do on Thursday and Friday. And I thought this was interesting. Early in the documentary, it said that Ringo would have to start filming The Magic Christian that day, but he's certainly seems to be there that day. You got no Billy in the studio. They have an idea for a book. They're like, oh, we've taken some great pictures of this, so we should at the very least make a book out of this project as well, so that's cool. And Paul says, yeah, I'm really glad we finally have a song we dig, which John was not thrilled about that. He's like, I like Dig a Pony. I like Don't Let Me Down. He feels his songs are being left out. Anyway, then the movie mentions, while they're talking highly about Billy, that his next 2 albums would wind up going on Apple, so the Beatles would work with him in his career going forward. They're just so thrilled to have him in the fold. And John makes a little comment there that they've gone in just 1 week from having only 3 members to now they've got 5, and it's true. Things are going well. John really wants him to be a full-blown member of the band and split the whole band 5 ways, but Paul does not want that to happen, yet, at least. Then John starts playing the song Road to Marrakesh, aka Child of Nature, which he had played earlier in the documentary. At this point, I noticed Paul has his Rickenbacker bass from the Magical Mystery Tour era, and George would have his Magical Mystery Tour era Stratocaster brought out that day as well. They do a little bit of an oldies jam, and then they start working on Two of Us again. Paul says that he wrote the song on guitar, and he doesn't feel right playing it on bass. He's like, I'm just going to play guitar. But then John doesn't love that, because he doesn't want to play bass. He has a guitar part he likes. And then Paul says, we don't need a bass. We'll do it like I'll Follow the Sun. I feel like there's been an inordinate amount of Beatles for Sale references in this documentary up to that point. Anyway, Paul says, we've done a few songs in the past that don't use a bass, and they're just kind of lighter songs, and it's fun. And so that leads to them having a little bit of a session without bass, where everything's a little bit more laid back. And it's actually really special to show that that was a good idea, because Paul initially does say, maybe we'll overdub some bass later, but John reminds him, no, we gotta do this live, we can't do overdubs. So they record Two of Us without a bass, with Paul on guitar, and it sounds great. It sounds just about how we remember it, except maybe a little slower than the final version, and things are going well. From there, they go into John plays a song, and in this same sort of arrangement, they play Polythene Pam. And then you see Mal setting up George's lap steel guitar. George is going to play lap steel on Her Majesty and Teddy Boy. 2 songs that wouldn't wind up on the Let It Be album, but of course Her Majesty would wind up in like a 15-second snippet at the end of Abbey Road, and Teddy Boy would wind up on Paul's first solo album. Really cool to see the Beatles doing versions of those songs with George on the lap steel there. Then John just sort of goes into a little jam, which includes Maggie May and Dig It. Now, of course, Phil Spector chose to include both of those songs on Let It Be, just from presumably this day's little jams, unless he jammed them again on the rooftop concert, and that's what they used, not sure. But after he's done with Dig It, he has his famous sort of ad-lib that gets put on the Let It Be album, where he says, that was Dig It by Georgie Wood, and now we're going to do Hark the Angels Come, you know, that famous line that, again, we've heard millions of times if we've listened to Let It Be. And I just thought George Martin, as they leave the studio for the evening, George Martin is like the classiest human being in the world. He just says, I fancy a drink. Shall we go to the local pub? He's just so posh all the time. I love it. Okay, now the final day that this episode of the documentary covers. Gosh, we've seen so much. It's day 16. It is, I believe it's now Saturday. Saturday the 25th. Billy can't come in that day either because he's doing more film stuff. He did show up towards the end of the day before, just to sort of check in. But yeah, he wouldn't be available for recording on this day either. At this point, Paul comes in very excited because he's been watching the film they took in India previously. He wants to make this into a movie. He's absolutely loving what he's seeing before, and it's cool to see his excitement for that project, and some members of the band having a little bit of nostalgic feelings towards maybe going back to India. At some point, it gets brought up that maybe we should spend 2 out of every 4 months in India. That would be crazy. But, again, eventually it all boils down to another disagreement. I forget exactly what started this disagreement, but they have another disagreement. And again, it's like, the second Billy leaves, the second they don't have Billy, they can't get along again. Billy is really tying them together at this point. And that disagreement leads to kind of a spontaneous impromptu performance of Act Naturally, which was fun. And then they go into Bye Bye Love because they're just jamming. And then they start working on the Two of Us harmonies, and again, it's just not going well. John and Paul are having a few arguments here. Glenn Johns comes in and says that we need to make sure to get this done quickly because they want to have everything done by Wednesday, because Glenn has actually extended his period to work with the Beatles through Wednesday, but he can't stay any later. And by this point, they realize that they're really not sure if they can put like the live show portion of what they wanted to do together. At this point, they want to do a take of For You Blue, and they did a couple of very interesting things. First of all, John is playing the pedal steel, which I did know that fact that he'd played the pedal steel, but they've prepared the piano. They're using a prepared piano, which is, a prepared piano is when you literally manipulate the strings of a piano in order to make it sound different. And they're like using newspapers inside the piano to sort of muddle the sound of it. I thought that was very interesting. And they have a very cool For You Blue session. At this point, they're referring to their makeshift studios as Apple Studios, which I thought was interesting. But at this point, the band receives word that they will not be able to use Primrose Hill for a concert. So that puts the final nail in the coffin for not just performing that show, but really performing any show with an actual audience. And this makes Paul certainly very sad, and John as well. But yeah, they really want to still play live, particularly Paul. Paul says he makes this interesting point where he says, if we don't play live, then it's just going to be like everything else we've done lately, you know? We're going to do this, and then there's going to be no payoff, and then we're just going to go home and come back in 3 weeks and do this again. He says, I want this project to have a payoff. I want it to have that live show experience. And, yeah, so he's really adamant about that. But George seems like he's most happy at the studio. George doesn't seem too thrilled about the opportunity of doing a live performance. He's happy in the studio environment for the first time. You know, he likes this much more than the environment at Twickenham, so he wants to just keep that up. But Paul is not happy about that, and he's very upset that they can't do it on a stage. And we get this amazing piece of film here where Michael and Glenn have come up with this idea to just go up on the roof. We'll just film on the roof, which of course we now know that is exactly what happened. And they have this piece of clip that purports to be of the moment they bring this up to Paul, I think. And he just looks so relieved. It's such a great idea. Overlooking London, up on the roof, with no fixed audience, but passersby being like, is that the freaking Beatles? So, really cool idea. They all go up on the roof, or at least Paul, Michael, and Glenn go up on the roof to see what the view looks like, see what it's like. And they really want to do this, but at a certain point they start to be concerned that what if the roof doesn't hold? So, not small concerns there. The band, is planning this concert for either Wednesday or Thursday. Then they go back into the studio session and work on Mean Mr. Mustard through lunch. And then from there they start going into Let It Be. And George says, where does the song start? And Paul just starts singing the verse, and George says, no, it should have an intro. And they don't come up with the exact intro as we famously know it. But I thought it was cool that it was George who said, no, the song should start with a piano intro. But then there's some more arguing. They don't like the way that direction is gone. It's amazing how quickly these sessions seem to stall with just the four of them without Billy there. And there's this clip of George Martin just looking really bored as things aren't coming together. And that's pretty much the end of that day, and thus the end of what they're going to show us in part 2 of this documentary. But it finishes with them saying that they've settled on Wednesday for the date of the concert. They want to do it on the rooftop, and that only gives them like 3 or 4 days to prepare. So, yes, more time constraints and more fun stuff to be seen in episode 3. Look at that! I've made another really ridiculously long video, but it's worth unpacking everything that's gone on in these documentaries. They're incredible. Thank you for watching if you've somehow made it to this point. I honestly don't know if anybody's watching at this point, so thank you if you are. Tomorrow I'll be doing my review of part 3, and the day after that I may do one for Long Promised Road, the new documentary shot about Brian Wilson. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow with my episode 3 analysis. Thank you for watching. So stoked about this documentary series. I'll catch you again tomorrow.